In this video, we'll examine some of the benefits of virtualization, and we'll also talk about some of the challenges that we have with traditional physical data centers. So with a traditional physical data center, we tend to need a lot of power, a lot of cooling to keep our data center at the proper temperature, and a lot of physical rack space. And we also have the cost of many physical servers. So with a traditional physical data center, what you have is one physical server for each operating system instance. So if I want a SQL server, an Exchange server, and all these different servers, I'm going to have one physical server for each of those kind of major applications. And this can lead to some operational challenges as well, because we might have to manage many different hardware platforms. Right? Hopefully most of our servers are similar, but possibly they are not. And so this may lead to multiple management tools and some additional complexity there. So one of the first benefits of data center virtualization is that it reduces the capital and operational expense. And first thing I'll say is it may take some time to realize this kind of capital cost savings, but the thought process is this, right? Traditional physical data center, every time you need a new server, you're going to have to install a new physical server, right? And so as you kind of scale out and add more applications, you're adding more physical servers, and that can get really expensive, right? Whereas with virtualization, we purchase a few ESXi hosts, right? And then as we are starting to add more virtual machines, right, we can add those virtual machines within the existing ESXi hosts, and therefore, hopefully we reduce the amount of capital expenditures, right? Also, the operational expense can decrease because we're managing a smaller footprint of physical servers than we would with a traditional physical data center. We also have application isolation and a reduced attack surface. So what does that mean? Well, let's kind of think about it this way. Some of you have probably had a server like this, right? I call it a catch-all server. Right? So maybe I've got this physical server with Windows installed, and I've got a few random applications, right? So I start installing multiple applications, and none of these applications are big enough to justify their own dedicated physical server. So I'll go ahead and install them all on the same physical server that they share. Right? And this is a traditional physical server. The side effect of this approach is I am increasing the attack surface. Right? So for example, let's say I've got this one application, and I'll kind of highlight it as a purple, the one in purple here, that has a vulnerability, right? And it's installed on the same server as all of these other applications. And some hacker manages to take advantage of that vulnerability. And now, look at all the other stuff that that hacker has access to, right? So we may want to isolate these applications. Another reason may be, what if one of these applications really starts using a whole lot of resources? Well, all the other applications are going to suffer. When we virtualize, it becomes much more practical to have a dedicated instance for each application, right? So if I've got an ESXi host and I want to start running multiple applications, well, I can roll out a different virtual machine for each and every application, because all of those virtual machines exist on the same physical server. So now I don't have to kind of intermingle many virtual machines on the same operating system. And this can allow me to do a number of things. Number one, it reduces the attack surface for each virtual machine. But number two, it also allows me to specify more strict firewall rules, right, for each of these virtual machines and maintain a better security posture. I can rapidly deploy virtual machines, right? Think about what it takes to deploy a physical server. We have to order the equipment. We have to get the budget approval to order the equipment in the first place. We have to physically rack and stack and power and cable, all the networking, right? And then we have to install an operating system and install our applications and do all of our testing, right? That can take a long time. With virtual machines, I could have an image. It's called a template. Right? I can have a template. I'll call this my template. And my template can be a pre-created image of a virtual machine, complete with operating system and all of my standardized configurations, maybe my Windows firewall rules, or who knows what else. And if I need a new server, a new virtual machine, I will just go ahead and deploy a new virtual machine based on that template. And it can be ready in a matter of minutes. So I can have very rapid deployment with a virtualized environment. How about availability? We'll talk a little bit more about availability later on in this course, but I have all of these tools like fault tolerance and high availability that we'll take a close look at later this week that can help my virtual machines automatically come back online if there's some sort of hardware failure. Centralized resource management. We've got this centralized management system with vSphere called vCenter, right? And it's kind of at the center of everything, right? So here's my vCenter server. It manages all of my ESXi hosts. It manages all of my data stores, my virtual machines, my virtual switches, right? My all of the hardware that I've assigned to my virtual machines, DRS and high availability and so on and so forth, right? I have this centralized resource management tool called vCenter that allows me to manage a variety of functions through a single platform. And another benefit, and this kind of sounds like a funny one, but increased hardware utilization, right? So let's think about it this way. With data center virtualization, we can take advantage of oversubscription. Right? What I mean by that is, let's say I've got a physical print server, and that physical print server uses a small fraction of the memory that it has. It uses a small fraction of the physical CPUs that it has. Well, I've paid for those resources. I paid for that CPU and that memory, and it's sitting there unutilized, and that's wasteful. But if I have an ESXi host, a physical hypervisor, here's my ESXi host, and I can just kind of pile up the VMs on it until those VMs are using those physical resources of that host at an acceptable level. I want to make sure if I purchase those physical resources, they're actually getting used. And so that's what virtualization gives us, is the ability to share those physical resources across multiple workloads. And that way they're not just sitting there idle. And then we also have policy-based resource allocation. This is another topic that we'll talk about in a couple of videos ahead here, but we'll have things like storage policies to ensure that my virtual machines are stored on the appropriate storage technology, and we can do things like shares and limits and reservations to ensure that the most important virtual machines are prioritized.